2. Welcome back at WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively just outside of paradise. We are in Catonsville, Maryland. Don Moeller here, former Baltimore County executive. And, I call you Bobby. He calls you Senator. I'm sure they call you other things in the district as well.
Those are the nicest things.
But you're retired or outgoing or incoming and attorney. And most importantly, and we don't do a lot of sports here. We did a little bit with Paul Taberzi, some with Dick Cass, but most importantly, struggling Ravens fan. We're getting through this. This is going to be 9 months of licking wounds here, right?
3 recovering Ravens
this is
fans.
one that it'll take a while to get over this last one, but I remember all the losses. But this is one that'll stick for a while. It was that was a hard one to watch.
Well, I think the three of us think we should still be playing. And before we get started, Nestor, let's thank all our sponsors: Jennings, State Fair, Fadley's, Center Maryland. We always encourage folks to go check out Thread, doing great work, transformational work in the city.
I got a picture of the salt and Boca, but I ate it. So if you want to see the salt and Boca, it's Baltimore. It's Baltimore Restaurant Week.
Good. It is right now, and good things are happening. So get out and support all of our sponsors. So, Bobby, I always say that you and Nestor. I've got a bunch of fans that are fanatical. My son-in-law, but you and Nestor aren't only. Fairweather fan, you travel, right? You go to away games.
It's the only way I know him. I don't really.
That's how we met. That's right.
Yeah,
and,
and I don't
Bobby
really.
Nick, remember Bobby Nick? God rest his soul.
Of course. I mean, I honestly, I was not so politically inclined that I would care that literally, I just knew you from the guy from the airport. Then I got to know you a little bit, but I think you and I have run into each other in airports
a lot of games,
but more than we've ever spent.
No question about that.
Yeah,
much more away
than we've been anywhere else.
That's right.
How many you and your brother tend to go together, or
I go
family?
with my brother. Actually, my 12-year-old now wants to go, and I took my 10-year-old daughter to her first game this year. We went to Buffalo, and Sophie, my oldest, and I went to Pittsburgh and Miami this year. So
wow!
Try to get
it's a family
three
affair.
3 or 4 a year. I try to get to.
Have you been to every stadium? Or are you missing some?
I'm missing a couple. I've got about 7 or 8 left.
Okay.
And a couple ones that I could have gone to this year but just didn't work out. Seattle is one that I haven't been to yet. Somehow I haven't been to Philadelphia yet either. So
really?
I'm hoping to get that on the – so there's about 7 or 8, mostly in the NFC.
First time we went to Seattle was 8 years ago. We play every 8 years. We walked into the press box. My wife was with me because she runs to get sound after the game when we're on the road. And we go back to get a coffee, and we come up. My wife puts coffee down. She's like, aha. I'm like, what? This is before she had cancer. She's like, I've now been to every stadium, and you haven't. I gave up my Super Bowl ticket to her sister in Phoenix. Eli Manning just retired. The Phoenix Super Bowl where Tom Petty played, I gave my ticket to my wife, and her sister was a Patriot fan, flew out. So I had never been in that stadium, and my wife had. So she had been to all 32, and I hadn't. So
have you been to all 32 now?
Yeah, but but they're about to change, right?
Right.
Vegas and LA are about to come online.
That's right.
I did make it to Carson. I thought about this because Kevin Burns, the only guy that's been that I know of that's been to more stadiums because he did a lot of preseason games in weird places that Art would play a game in Birmingham. Back in the 80s, they would do that.
Right.
But you got to collect stadiums you add new ones.
Right. The problem is, so I went to the St. Louis Rams stadium, but I haven't been to the LA Rams yet. So I'm not sure how you count that. So I've been to 20. I don't count the games either. By the way, if you go to a stadium,
that's it.
And the
it's
Ravens
good for the whole
aren't,
city. Okay.
Well, if the Ravens aren't playing, it doesn't actually count. So I've been to 25 stadiums where the Ravens were playing.
Okay.
So
what's your favorite
that's
stadium,
man?
Bobby?
That's incredible.
I mean, M&T Bank is my favorite.
I mean,
stadium
other than
by,
M&T.
by a long shot. It's all based on whether you win or lose the game.
Right.
So the games that we've lost, I hate the stadiums.
That's a long trip back.
I don't love getting yelled at in Pittsburgh. That's not my favorite thing, getting screamed at by people in Pittsburgh. But when we win, then you're trash talking them. That becomes more fun. So I like Miami. It's always great to go down there. I enjoy the stadiums where the Ravens fans outnumber the other teams, and so Miami, Tennessee, we often have a ton of people down there. So, those are my favorite stadiums, I think. I did not like Cincinnati particularly. No offense if you like Cincinnati. Cleveland was whatever.
Well, you're talking experiential more than
It's all
stadium.
experiential for me,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good jumping off point because sports does bring people together. You know,
Absolutely.
One of the things about Baltimore Positive, and maybe I haven't talked about it a lot, but I know Don and I talked about it in the 100th episode we did to sort of commemorate this thing, is that the spirit of sports that brings us together as a community to say, I'm a Baltimore sports fan. And I go through this with the Orioles and how they've treated me versus how they treat you and they treat Don. They've had different standards for that. And the pride that's built into saying, I'm from Baltimore. And for three guys with a little silver, and I didn't shave today because I wanted to give you my rugged look today because you're a survivor. Both of you are a survivor of the political thing. But the love of Baltimore, you know what I mean, was the reason the Ravens exist.
Right.
It was our passion as a community to say, we want Baltimore to be in the National Football League, and that would matter for Baltimore to have a stadium. We're going to have taxpayers and guys like you go down to Annapolis and try to figure this out so that we can have our own team.
Yep.
And the pride of Baltimore is part of, why it says Baltimore Positive and, on the logo here. Some thoughts about Baltimore pride and how sports brings it together, because I sense that through you.
Yeah,
especially when you're in a purple jersey.
I love this city. I love this city. I mean, I have not worn purple. I'm in a little bit of a mourning period right now, so I'm wearing green and other colors for right now until the Super Bowl is over. But yeah, I mean, I love what you guys are doing. I love the idea of highlighting the positives of Baltimore. Sports obviously is a huge one. But there's so much good about this city and about this region, and you don't see nearly enough of it in the media, right? All you see every day is the latest shooting or the latest debate or who's in trouble. And there's so much more to this area. There's so much good stuff going on all over I mean, your county executive and in the city. There's great things going on. Ravens are obviously, for me, on or at the top of the list. But there's so much going on in the communities and in sports and at the schools that you don't ever hear about. So I love what you guys are doing.
Well,
with
we
this.
talk all the time, Bobby, about, and we will at some point get into your district and your career as an elected official. But we talk all of the time about the cultural and arts museums, the medical care, the medical institutions in Baltimore City, the parks. I mean, there, like you say, there is so much. There's so much going on that the future is bright. I mean, we had the folks from May and Reichel on not long ago, the landscape architectural firm. They've just got a big contract now to totally redo Rash Field, and I think people are going to be really excited about that. You represented a district, and I always think those of you who I'll call represent those inside the Beltway districts. I mean, you had an expansive district, but part of it truly was a neighbor to Baltimore City.
Sure.
I mean, you had a unique understanding of that, and as the chair for many years of the Judicial Proceedings Committee in Annapolis, you really had insight to issues of crime and others. What's your takeaway as someone who represented an area that really was right next door to Baltimore City?
So there's no difference. Obviously, issues from the county to the city don't stop at some artificial line. And so we neighbored Baltimore. My district was completely neighboring Baltimore City. I mean, right from Pikesville all the way up, York Road, all these areas, we were right on the city-county line. And so the issues that we have affect them. The issues that the city have affect the county. I mean, we're all in this together. And quite frankly, my thought on Baltimore City was that so goes Baltimore City, not just so goes my district, but so goes the state, right? I mean, it's the beating heart of our state, not just this area. So we all had, I'm not in office anymore, but I always thought, and I think most people down there believe this as well, Mike Miller, Mike Bush, all of them certainly would talk about that, the idea that, we all have a collective responsibility to help the city. They have their own unique problems, but so does every area. And so, you brought up the crime issue. I mean, the crime issue doesn't stop at those lines either, right? It bleeds into the county, and we all use Baltimore City. I mean, I love going downtown. I love going particularly to M&T Bank Stadium, but not just there, the harbor and all the museums.
I thought you just loved
and all the rest.
BWI. That's the only place I see you.
That's really the place I see you. And every once in a while at a basketball game.
I bet your girls have been to the zoo.
Sure, of course, of
Right.
course. And so the issues that are, kind of very stubbornly sticking with the city right now, particularly crime. The state has a collective responsibility to help in the short term, to help in the midterm, and to help in the long term with all these issues. Because if you don't, the state suffers. It's not just Baltimore City that suffers.
Do you think people in Annapolis understand that? I mean, I think this is an ongoing battle for our country right now, where day by day I watch an impeachment trial where facts are laid out by real patriots that apparently 38 to 43%, depending on who you check, don't seem to want to know or don't seem to want to care. I would say the state could be divided very similarly, where me being a city resident, I'm a little upset with Larry because Larry hasn't been on my doorstep. There's been a lot of talk and not a lot of action. And then, of course, the mayoral situation, which begat Baltimore Positive, the whole impetus to do this was I can't sell my place. Nobody around me is prospering. Businesses are going out, and I put the news on every night, and all of the good things are being weighed down. I feel like there needs to be change, and it needs to happen through elections. And then good people like you decide, hey, man, a couple decades of this, there needs to be more. There needs to be more people who care enough to say, I want to get a shovel, instead of just hold my nose and say that's someone else's problem. Because quite frankly, I feel like I did that after the riots. I feel like I said, I'm not going to talk about that. That'll fix itself. It didn't come close to fixing itself.
Yeah, it hasn't fixed itself. So I have a little bit of a different take on
Sure.
it. And we may disagree on some of these. I actually think Larry's done a pretty good job. And I'm a Democrat and a proud one, but I actually think Larry, I mean, I had some disagree. I disagree with myself half the time. I mean, it's not always 100% on everything, but I think Larry's done a pretty good job of kind of keeping a balance, being bipartisan. I mean, for somebody who was down there, I mean, I worked pretty well with him on a whole host of issues. Didn't always agree, but
it feels like it's hard to get things done to benefit the city there. It feels to me as a city resident that it's sort of not a high priority, but it's a high priority to talk about the problems here.
I think it's more of a priority than you think.
The
city budget-wise gets a ton, and is it enough? That's never enough. But the crime issue has gotten a ton of attention. I mean, there have been, in my 5 years as chair of JPR, we threw as many things against the wall as we could. I mean, from all sides of the criminal justice kind of debate, and it's not one thing. So we tried everything, right? We tried to increase sentences on violent criminals and decrease sentences and get people into treatment as much as we could instead of incarceration, and allow people to expunge their records for lower level offenses, and try to help get police away from doing things like marijuana, which were wasting time and resources and so forth, and try to focus their attention on, at least as best we could, on violent criminals. And I mean, we threw a laundry list of legislation and laws and so forth, and really just at this point has not made a dent. Will it in 5 years? You hope so, but there's a lot of issues there.
Well, as a citizen, tell me about crime, because that's where this whole thing begins. Bobby Zirkin joining us here. Senator,
former
football friend.
Once a senator, always a senator,
right?
I'd like to just think of myself as a lockdown basketball defender. That's really all I want to be known as.
We're going to get into
Gary Payton Jr.
Having spent time now with Martin O'Malley and so much time around Donnie, Johnny O, and my goodness, we have Anne Arundel County and Hartford County. Glassman and Pittman are both be joining us a couple weeks. Crime. What should a citizen know that an elected official would know after getting up day after day, and whether you got voted for or not, whether it was shed on a positive light or a negative light, probably depended on the murder rate and whether somebody or in your community had been harassed in some way to say it's been a good week or a bad week in my community?
So it's a big question. From the standpoint of a legislator, I mean, at least in our committee, we woke up literally every single day during those 90 days when I was chair, talking about it, thinking about it, trying to strategize about it. Of course. It's the problem that drives everything else, right? Because you can't possibly get as much economic development in the city as we could have until you get the crime rate under control. You can't have the type of schools you have unless you get the juvenile system under control. All these things are intertwined with each other, right? And so everything, in my opinion, everything starts with getting that crime rate under control. And I don't mean under control from going from 300 plus murders to the high 200s, right? I mean, there was a time in this city with many more people that you were down in the hundreds, like low hundreds. I mean, it is so unacceptable what's going on in terms of the city right now, in terms of the murder rate and the non-fatal shootings and the carjackings and all the rest. It's beyond unacceptable to the point where you talk about a reduction as if somehow that's a good thing, which of course it is, but the reduction they're talking about is so minimal. Right. You're talking about just a couple of shootings that went to the left a little bit versus the right, you know, the luck of where the bullet went. I mean, we are nowhere near where we need to be. There, I mean, in Annapolis, there needs to be, in my opinion, there's a whole host of things that should be done in addition to all the things that we've done before. From funding, I agree with the Kerwin and funding education, but that's all stuff that's going to take a decade to help in terms.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
It's not saying we shouldn't do it, but that's not all you should do, right? I mean, you can walk.
The Beltway didn't get built in a month, but it was a good idea.
You can walk and chew gum at the same time. So
keep going with that idea.
But I like the idea of obviously doing education and drug treatment and focusing on the opioid epidemic, and all those things are incredibly important, right? Having universal pre-K, all those things are long term very important. And then there's the short term important too, right? So you've got to. And I agree with Larry wholeheartedly with Governor Hogan what he's saying. You have to focus on the violent criminals. There's a very small percentage of the criminals who are committing a huge percentage of the violent crimes. And these are people that have been through the system over and over and over and over and over again. And part of the problem, which we talked about a little bit, or at least said we were going to talk about, which is what's going on in politics, is everything's gotten lumped together. Like if you focus on violent criminals, that somehow that's the same thing as, and by focusing, I mean put these people away, you're somehow get lumped in with focusing on people who are smoking marijuana and saying that, that they're not the same thing, right? You can say that drug addicts should be put into a treatment system, but say that if you commit violent crimes over and over again, you belong in jail. You do not belong in society. And it's not wrong to say that. It's not racist to say that. It doesn't matter what their race is. If somebody's committing crime, violent crime after violent crime after violent crime, they belong in jail.
I think about this in terms of my wife walking down the street to pick up her medication. Last night, 5 o'clock, I walked with her. There was no way I wouldn't walk with her, but I don't even know what it means for me to walk with her.
Well,
right?
I think the former Governor O'Malley made that point. Certainly a number of the candidates that we've had on for mayor, and again, shameless self-promotion if you're listening, we're with former Senator Bobby Zirkin. We have interviews currently up with pretty much all of the mayoral candidates, more to come. Seventh congressional district.
Yep.
Those interviews are up, so if you're trying to make an intelligent decision. But we had former Governor and Mayor Martin O'Malley on, and I think what he cut to was that what gets lost in this is that every family wants the same thing.
Every single one.
No one wants to be held prisoner.
That's right.
In a sense, it's actually a form of terrorism. What is happening in the city, holding people hostage. That right now,
I always felt like the dirt bikes were terrorism 10 years ago. Like literally, on Sunday afternoons, the dirt bikes would come through, and I'd say, "Why can't we make that stop? Like that's not acceptable. That wouldn't go on anywhere." And I thought that was terrorism.
Yeah, that's a picnic compared to
now. There's can my wife walk down to get a beer on Cross Street?
So these issues. When you say there are a lot of things that's interesting, and maybe you can expand upon it.
Sure.
You talked about focusing on violent offenders because a number of the folks we've had on have said that. Matt Gallagher, who we had on, who certainly was right in the command center at CityStat and StateStat, pointed out right away that you've got to get serious about monitoring those on parole.
That's right.
And then a number of the candidates, Theroux, TJ, Brandon, all of them talk about what you indicated, Bobby. What a small, really few square miles are driving almost all of the crime.
That's right.
In the city. We know where it is.
That's right. It is. And, I mean, it seems fairly self-evident, although I was listening to the radio on the way down here, and they were talking about how few officers, this idea that we were understaffed in terms of officers in the city. Well, it hasn't gotten better.
We had the police commissioner on talking
worse.
about it. Right?
So,
we're at 2650, something like that. At one point, we were at 29, and before that, 3150 at a high.
And that's what you need. You have to have patrol officers on the street. And I'm not a local. I never was in local government before, so I don't know what it takes to do that to get staffed up. But whatever it is has to happen, right? That's a no-brainer. That's an easy one. You're at this number. You have to be at this number. Maybe you should be even a little higher than that based on what's going on right now. Get it done. That's where we should be spending money. That's where we should be making sure that you have to do that. That's basic as it gets, right?
And there are programs that we know, and we'll take a break and then come back.
Sure.
But there are programs that we know you can prove by data are effective. Safe Streets.
Safe Streets
The
is great.
recent reports on Safe Streets, both in Park Heights and in the Cherry Hill area, in those zones designated as safe streets, where homicides have basically become non-existent. And then you say to folks, you can go look at dots on a map. Safe Streets is working. Well, then, as a former educator, I'm saying if that works,
Let's do it
all
again.
right, let's expand
So,
it.
Interestingly, like in a bill that we did, which, it had a lot of elements in there, and I took a lot of heat for some of it, if you recall, just a couple. I'm not quite sure why, but at the end of the day, one of the things we did in there was fully fund. We got a ton of funding in that Senate Bill 122, which was the big crime bill at the time, including fully funding Safe Streets, not just the existing ones, but to expand to all of the different locations. I mean, and that's fully funded for 5 years in that bill. So, I mean, there were other things, there were other funding mechanisms in that bill, but typically JPR wasn't allowed to spend any money, but so we did a lot of those things. It just, for whatever reason, it just the fruits of that labor have not come to fruition at this point in time. It doesn't mean that you got to stop trying. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, but what we were just talking about is basic stuff, right? The idea that you're listening to the radio and hearing that you're hundreds of officers low, I understand it. It's
And crime's up.
And crime's up.
Imagine that.
Those are two things where you can have a direct correlation, right? You have to have enough officers in the street. You probably should have more than enough in terms of because of what's going on in the city in order to bring it back down. Martin did a great job when he was mayor. I mean, he gets criticized too from some wings of our party now. But let me tell you something. I remember those times when Martin was mayor. That crime rate was really low.
Nestor, I'm going to jump in. Tell the story, and it'll be a great one to take us to break. Tell the story about the young African-American male that walks into Fadley's.
We pull, and I don't know Martin O'Malley at all, so I want to make that clear that I got to know him on camera, and I called my wife when it was over and said it was one of the best conversations I've ever had on radio, and I've done 35,000 hours of radio. So I walked up to Martin. He was signing a book for Don, giving me a book. I don't know him at all. He asked for my name, and a young African-American kid came up, probably a kid for me, but late 20s,
Yeah, maybe
20s.
20s, yeah.
And he came up, and he's like, "Hey, you're Mayor O'Malley." He called him Mayor O'Malley.
Called him Mayor.
Right? So we're Fadley's in Lacey Mark. He's like, you're the best mayor ever, man. Can I hug you?
Yeah.
And Martin gives him a big hug, and he goes on his way. And, of course, Martin being flippant, he says, the African American.
According to my critics.
According to my critics, no one would ever believe that just happened,
And
Martin did and for me, I'm very, people are like, I don't understand. You're really good friends with Martin, and you really are good friends with Larry Hogan. I'm like, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be in politics, right? I like both of them. I mean, the fact that they don't like each other.
I've never had a crossword with Larry Hogan, but he hasn't come on the show.
Well, we're gonna
I can't.
I like Larry.
we're gonna come back and
think he's
talk
done.
about partisanship and your decision to step away and family considerations and your new journey. Nestor, where are we today?
We're at Jennings. And I would get the Jennings burger, but it's restaurant week, and I got the salt and boca, and I got a steak salad, and I don't know what you're getting.
You said
And
it was
probably
pretty
get
darn
Jennings.
good, right?
It was unbelievably good.
I'm having a beer. I'm not an elected office.
There you go, man. We have the Guinness logo in reverse because of the mirror. We're just near Paradise. We are in Catonsville. Bobby Zirkin is with us. Don Moeller is with us. I'm Nestor. We are Baltimore Positive. Back with a few more conversations with the senator from Catonsville.